Hi everyone, welcome to another tips and tricks video, and this time I'm doing another canvas rescue. I had an outline on it which I discarded, and after that I toned the canvas very slightly with burnt umber, and then now I am giving it a rough outline of a girl with a veil. And for this painting I'm going to just harken back to my previous video where I did the portrait of a Maasai woman, and I said that pure color is the best way to get luminous skin tones, and in this painting you'll see that that is the same answer here as well. And what I am doing right now is I'm blocking off sections of color. I'm not really going into detail, and I'm giving my lights and my darks a little bit of definition. I get asked a lot what kind of palette to use for deep olive skin tones, and I will post the information below in the description, but the colors I used for her skin tone are ultramarine blue, chromoxide green, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, cadmium red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, titanium white, and Naples yellow. I tend to use Naples yellow a lot for the highlight, and instead of black for the eyes and for the face, I tend to mix my black for the face specifically with burnt umber and ultramarine blue. I find that that gives a softer black, but I do use Mars black for the hair, and I water it down with a little bit of ultramarine blue and burnt umber. And I know that the lips here are a little bit tricky. I know I didn't do them right, so I'm gonna have to go back in and redo it later, so ignore that. The initial part of a painting can be a little bit rough because it takes a lot of willpower to get through that really awful, awkward phase that all paintings seem to have. And a lot of beginning artists are always a little disheartened, and I tell them, look past the fact that it doesn't look like how you want it to, and keep building and keep going, and eventually you will get there. And I'm going in and adding the veil. She has a red veil over her face. The veil that she's wearing over her face is transparent, and I'll walk you through how I got a transparent effect. I like working wet in wet, and that helps me mesh the colors together and layer thicker globs of paint on top of each other where I want more definition. To get the transparent effect of the veil, I like to first go in and do the base colors first, by which I mean I want to do the layer that is behind the veil. I want to paint the face that is behind the veil and then add in the layer of the veil on top of that. That way I can push the colors to blend in if I want, or if I want them to stand out, I can add a little bit more red and create a higher definition. All this while, I keep in mind the nature of the veil. It's going to show some skin through, even though there are parts that are bunched up and seem semi-opaque that I can't see through it. So near the eye, I made sure to give a little bit of a highlight that can be seen through the veil, and it gives more of a dynamic, more actually translucent effect to the veil. One thing I find really helpful to be able to establish contrast very well is to work on the background alongside your subject, because that way I can tell how the contrast and how the colors are going to look in comparison to the background. A darker background kind of changes how I'm going to use my colors, and a lighter background will make the contrast look different as well. So that's really something to keep in mind as you work along the painting, because if you've done a painting and then you add a background and it changes the contrast level completely, you're going to have to start again, and you're going to have to do a lot of touch-ups. So if you do it alongside, it really spares you a lot of work later on towards the end of the painting. And I've been guilty of not working on the background alongside my painting too, but this time I'm keeping it in mind. The veil has a golden fringe, and I wanted it to show the reflection of the veil color. So the red of the fabric it hits and it bounces off the gold. And a lot of times I see people, when they paint gold, they don't necessarily reach for reds and greens but there are times where the colors are more than just browns and yellows and whites. Take a good look at what you're painting. Take a good look at the ambient colors that your reflective surfaces are picking up, and that will make your painting just a lot more realistic. In the veil, I've used greens, browns, and reds, and those are the same greens, browns, and reds I've used on her skin tone as well. And as you can tell, I'm having a rough time with the mouth. I'm going to have to go in and I'm going to have to really work on the shadows over there. They can be a little bit tricky, but believe in yourself. That's what I always say. Just keep going and eventually you will get there. As you can tell, I had to scrape off some of the paint and start fresh. It's a really rough ride sometimes. So for the shadows, I wanted there to be cool shadows on her face. And in the shadows, I kind of add a little bit of red where the veil kind of gives a little bit of a red sheen to the shadows. So I mixed burnt umber, chromatic green, and ultramarine blue. And if I needed to add a little bit of yellow ochre or burnt sienna, I would add it in there, and I got this beautiful purpley color that I used around her mouth to create the shadow of the veil over there. The best thing about oil paints is that when you want to create detail, you don't really have to go in and create every little dot and every little detail. You can give suggestions of detail really, really easily. I'm going in and I'm adding these little white dots, I think those are sequins or something like that, in her headpiece. And I used a little bit of white and then I go in and I add a deeper color because I don't want them to be the center focus of the painting. They will be too loud otherwise. And for the veil, again, I'm filling in the background. That is, I'm giving it a dark background and then going over that while the paint is still wet to give it a lovely translucent effect where you can blend in the foreground with the background. And notice that I create depth in the veil by using different shades of red. And I used white and alizarin crimson to kind of create a muted rose that I used to kind of show a shimmering effect of the veil that didn't contrast and that didn't ask for too much attention from the actual brighter reds that I was using on the veil. Muted tones, gray tones, are really great for creating depth that doesn't compete with the brighter colors that you have. And in my previous video on darker skin tones, I had said that pure color is the key to luminous skin tones. And that's the same here as well. I just chose a different palette, but it's the same concept. On her neck and on her face, I used a lot of cadmium orange, just straight up cadmium orange to create the skin tone that I did. I didn't dilute it with burnt sienna. I didn't do any of that. I just kind of pushed the colors into each other on my canvas and I let the layers of wet paint kind of do their thing. There were times where I really wanted to blend the wet layers together, and there are times where I want the cadmium orange to shine through. And I'm also using full-on bright reds for her clothing, and it's the same concept. I'm not mixing on my palette as much as letting the colors blend together on my canvas. For the shadows, I'm actually adding a little bit of green and a little bit of blue to the mix because I want it to be a more dynamic, more contrast-oriented shadow rather than just like a deeper or a darker version of whatever color that is I'm using. For the highlights, I actually just use lighter reds, and I also make sure to lose some of my edges because there's no need for the edges to be really, really stark. I find that a little bit jarring. I want it to be a figure that's coming out of the darkness. So you have a little bit of the background still inching towards her and still a part of her. And I find that to be a more beautiful way of depicting a figure. And I'm going in and adding definition to the fringe of the veil that she's wearing, and I'm repeating the same colors. I'm a big fan of repetition. I don't like to introduce colors just for the sake of introducing them. I like to repeat whatever colors I'm using throughout the painting. So I'm using burnt sienna, yellow ochre, Naples yellow, and chrome oxide green over and over and over in this veil because I find that it creates a much more harmonious look. And the green just really contrasts beautifully with the red. I didn't want to create like a solid black background. I wanted there to be variation in the background as well. So I lightened up the background color that I was using on her left with a little bit of white and worked with that on the other side as well. And as you can tell, I'm making sure that all the layers are wet so that I can put layers on top and blend them together. I find that the moment my layers get dry, I really don't get that much of a beautiful soft shadow effect. They become much more crisp lines, and I'm not going for that right now. I need the veil to be translucent. I need the layers to mesh in one another, and crisp lines have a time and place, but this is not what I need right now. The veil takes a long time. There are a lot of details to it, but if you play with the color, if you play with the shadows, it becomes much more interesting. In most of my paintings, one of the things that I do that I find creates a lot of visual interest is to use a lot of complementary colors in the shadows. Here I have a subject that has a lot of red in her garment, so I use green, the opposite, the complementary color, to create a sense of dynamism in the painting. And if it's blue, where I have a lot of blue on the background, I make sure that there's a lot of orange highlights nearby so that it creates this effect of bouncing color that creates a dynamic painting. For the sequins in her veil, the sequins in my source photo were red, green, silver, and a little bit of gold, but I'm just going to go with the green because I want to keep it simple. And I put green dots everywhere. And then I make the shadows deeper with a really dark, beautiful shade of ultramarine in there, and then add some white and some Naples yellow to brighten up where I need to brighten it up. I'm putting in the final touches before I can call the painting completely done. And here we go.